Hi everyone. Sorry I couldn't be with you today, but we all know how that is. For those that don't know me, I'm LaSharon McLean Perez. I'm the Assistant Director for Study Abroad at the University of California, Riverside. And I'm just going to share a little bit about my own thoughts and thinking about pathways to leadership in education abroad. Um, it's certainly a question my students ask me all the time about how did I get where I'm at right now? And I would say my story is an unconventional story that when I returned from grad school after coming home from Australia, walked into the study abroad office, walked out 30 minutes later, I get a phone call. Hey, our administrative assistant is leaving. Do you want a job? And I could have been that person, been like, no, I don't want your job. I'm a theater major. I'm going to be the next Oprah. I'm going to be in Hollywood and Broadway, blah, 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 blah. However, I am always talking to my students about strategic opportunities that sometimes you have to take strategic risks when opportunities present. And in that case, I knew I also wanted to eventually teach and possibly be in higher ed. So I took the position. It was supposed to be a temporary position for only 6 months to maybe a year. And so when you talk about upward mobility, sometimes it is a step ladder. You just keep going up, 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 and up. Now, in some cases, especially when you're dealing with institutions and universities, there is not a step ladder. The only way to move is if somebody retire, quit, or die. And it's unfortunate, especially the last one. But that's the only way you move. And so sometimes you got to kind of zigzag and make your own path. And this is the next thing I tell my students, that just because a job doesn't exist doesn't mean it won't be created. And in my case, my next two positions were created for me. They weren't positions that were already there. So for me to circumvent that ladder, I had positions created. So my next position, being the International Project Coordinator, was created out of the necessity of my own skill sets. That the director saw that I brought unique skills to the table and that this position needed to be held. And so that for me was having a director or someone up in upper management seeing what I offered and what I could bring to the table. My current position came out of the director seeing my need for leadership. That everything that had been doing up to that point was in a leadership position. That I was taking on more responsibility and therefore had to create something that was equivalent to what I was doing on the day to day in the office. So I always tell people, just because it wasn't there and it doesn't exist doesn't mean it won't ever exist. Which brings me to barriers and challenges. Um, I always say I'm one of many and one of few. One of many in the sense that there are a lot of women in education abroad. I see you all the time. You're my colleagues. Some of you are probably even sitting in there and like, oh, Cher's not in Hawaii. And then I'm one of few in the sense of people of color, diversity within education abroad. However, that is one thing that I don't think I've ever really thought of and was probably really aware of my own self. I'm always one who's always fighting that diversity agenda when I'm talking to about with students and about students and study abroad, but never amongst my own colleagues, and especially looking in upper leadership positions, seeing myself in someone else. I think it only became a reality to me this last past year at the NAFSA annual conference when new colleagues coming into the field are turning to me as a mentor, and I'm like, you're talking to me, right? And then me having to realize, of course they're talking to me because they see me as that example, that person in a leadership role that they're looking up to. So, in terms of barriers within education abroad, it's interesting that I was reading research from Catalyst and the Corporate Leadership Council from 2001, and the five things that they noted as barriers in leadership was the lack of mentors and role models. That if they don't exist, how do you see yourself? How do you see yourself in a role when you don't see others in that role? Um, Interesting enough, either you have to create those mentors for looking at leadership that you don't see there, or become a mentor for those so that they can move up. Um, Exclusion from the communication, that because I'm a female or my ethnic makeup, I am being left out of these leadership conversations. That's huge, because you can't gain knowledge. You don't know what to look for. You don't know what you're doing if you're being excluded from the communication. The next barrier being stereotypes and preconceptions of roles and abilities. That if I'm a woman, I'm too sensitive and I'm too feeling and caring to have a leadership position. And if you know me, and my students will tell you, I'm meanie. I'm the mean one on campus when it comes to study abroad. Or that because I'm an African American, or I'm Hispanic, or I'm Native American, or I'm Jewish, that my ethnic makeup brings certain things that don't set me up for a leadership role. That there's a lack of experience, or even being challenged with giving responsibilities because of what your gender or your race is. So, first of all, I'm being stereotyped. Second of all, I'm not giving or being given any task or even being set up for an upward mobility because of those two things. And then the last one, the commitment to personal or family responsibilities. And this one goes really much hand in hand, especially when you look at females. That, oh, we can't give you a leadership role because of your family obligation, because your kids are going to get in the way and whatnot. And I know a lot of female colleagues that, yes, you have families, but you're able to do your job. I'm a single mother. And on the day to day, yes, it's a struggle to balance my kid and balance my work, but I have found it. And I now have a son who's out there in the workforce, who's taken what I have set in front of him, that mom can do this and mom has done this because I've set that example. So those 5 things being our barrier. The interesting thing when you're looking at what can be helped and what can be done in terms of leadership came out of me reading the CIA's 2013 Directors Diversity and Leadership Study. In that, they noted how to help bring diversity within leadership is 1, senior management commitment. If you don't have the commitment from the top, then it's never going to happen. You're never going to see the changes. You're always going to see that one type at the top and everyone else down here, or literally in the middle, striving to try to climb. So if the leadership is not taking on the responsibility and the commitment to have a more diversified leadership change, it's never going to happen. Other things is accountability. That you have to be accountable. That if your objective is to have a more diversified leadership chain, then somebody needs to be accountable. What tools are being set in place for this type of accountability? Interesting enough, out of that study, they talked about training and education about gender and racial equality, that they felt as though that was a failure in that promoting the upward mobility of diversity within leadership roles. That they only saw training and education being a thing to be able to work within your peer groups. However, the information coming out of that wasn't something that was helping you advance women and people of color into leadership roles. So that was an interesting takeaway. However, with that, networking and mentoring programs. There's got to be networks and programs and processes set up that you have to have this mentoree process, that I can't get here without someone me looking to for leadership. I've been very lucky that I've had great mentors that I have pulled from different places to help me get where I am, but I had to search for that myself. There weren't things set into place. Just recently, NAFSA has incorporated the Diversity Impact Program, but that didn't exist when I was coming up. So I had to look to the Diane Eltons, the Steve Jacques, the Gary Rhodes, the Bill Clabbys, the Cynthia Banks to be my role models to get to where I am. And then my current peers looking at, okay, what are you doing to advance? Because for me, this is a constant cycle of learning and training and building on what your peers know and then what your leadership and management knows. Next slide is management and upper leadership needs to recognize diversity and talent. You can't diversify leadership if you don't understand what type of talents and skill sets they bring to the table. Many people will say I'm a crazy person because I'm an outward thinker. I think outside the box. I have my own way of doing my own style. However, I have had those who've seen my unique way of processing and handling and challenges and saw that I could bring things to the table. So with that, I've been successful still being who I am and yet moving my way up. Next thing, finding that work-life balance. Because some people will perceive that your family and your life is number one and your work is secondary. And then others will flip-flop that. So finding that healthy balance. And I think I have, although most time it looks like I have a more fun life than work life. And then others will say, you work way entirely too much. And for me, I think I have found a very nice balance between what I'm doing for work and when I'm having fun. And oftentimes I've found ways to combine the two. The other thing is recruitment. I would say least lastly is recruitment. You can't diversify your leadership if you're not finding recruitment strategies that will help diversify. Not saying that, oh, we have XY position open, I'm going to hire a woman because we have lack of women in leadership roles, or I'm going to hire a person of color because we are lacking that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that being mindful that if you want to diversify leadership, looking at a broad spectrum. Oftentimes, I think people get looked over because we're not looking that broadly. But also in terms of recruitment, we also have to start training people to be ready for that career advancement. And I say that, especially being in education abroad, think about the students we are currently working with. First of all, especially if you're working in a very diverse institution or with diverse students already, they may not see you or see themselves. So for me, I did not see myself in study abroad. However, I was lucky that I sought that out. My students are lucky because their advisors reflect who they are. They can see themselves in me. But if they can't see yourself in you, you need to be that mentor. You've got to train them. You've got to be able to say, hey, this is a possibility that doing education abroad, if you're thinking about internationalization, this is the things you need to be doing. So you need to be actively putting this out for students. So for me, that's the one thing I say. It's a cycle of education, I would say. Grooming that next cohort. Not only grooming the next cohort, For those that are at the leadership positions, being that mentor, being that guidance. So those are my thoughts in today about pathways to leadership. And thank you guys for your time. Enjoy the rest of Hawaii.